region, which is California, Nevada, and the Oregon Klamath Basin. And my focus is really in collaboration, building partnerships, education, and outreach. And I've been a representative on the California Fire Alliance for almost 10 years. And with that group, we have been involved in doing community wildfire protection plan workshops throughout the state. And probably the last 5 years or so started including workshops and materials on wildlife best management practices and environmental compliance, which kind of came up through working with the California Fire State Council Grants Clearinghouse and some different problems people were having. So just helping them better scope their projects. And I think I'll go more into what the CWPPs and BMPs are throughout my presentation here. I'll make sure I can turn my... So just a quick outline then of my presentation. I'm going to talk about what is a community wildfire protection plan, if people aren't familiar with that, and how is it relevant to you. What are best management practices and why do you want them? I'm going to go over a few of the key steps in developing a CWPP, which really translates to doing collaborative landscape planning. So even if you're not doing that particular type of plan, a lot of what I'm talking about will be relevant to that kind of collaborative effort. And then just briefly into how you can develop and integrate those wildlife BMPs into that effort, and then just kind of highlight some of the key points. So what a CWPP is, it's a community wildfire protection plan, and there's actually quite a bit of national guidance and policy out there. There's the Healthy Forest Restoration Act, which mandates U.S. Forest Service and BLM to be involved and support those community collaboration efforts. And there was a guide back in 2004 on preparing a community wildfire protection plan. And then there was also a supplemental guide that came out in 2008. So there is quite a bit of information out there. It is really a national directive, and that is for all partners across the landscape. And it's basically about strategic planning focused on protecting those community assets, those values at risk to wildfire. Having this community wildfire protection plan will qualify those associated projects for various grant funding, and also enhances the federal, the agency projects under the National Fire Plan. Most of the grant funding is funneled through the California Fire State Council Clearinghouse, and if those projects, any of the projects that are doing fuel treatments, have to be associated with that community welfare protection plan to even qualify for that. And just by having that collaborative group and that strategic plan, there are a lot of different funding sources that can assist you in doing your field treatments. And one is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and CalEMA. They actually have a hazard mitigation program and grants. And although it's all hazard and all risk, and they have their own particular plans and requirements, they have accepted the CWPP as the fire component for that, the FEMA hazard mitigation program. So that is another benefit to having that. The CWPP requirements are very, very simple. And part of that is to allow you to adapt that to your particular needs locally, because it's really trying to enhance collaboration. Oh, am I not speaking loud enough? I have kind of an old phone, so it sounds like some people there are having trouble hearing me. But so remember, it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's something very strategic, very collaborative, and the key is not necessarily to get funding. It's how you build this collaborative process that builds your stakeholders and involvement across multiple jurisdictions, because collaboration can be a long and painful process. It's not just sharing information. It's about a shared decision-making process. And so that is a big, valuable direction if you're trying to address a large issue like wildfire, that you can't do it alone, your agency, as an individual and organization. The only way to really address it is through a strong collaboration effort. So wildlife BMPs. BMPs, it's a pretty general phrase. You've probably heard about them for just about any program area. It could be changing your oil. I mean, there's a bazillion different ways you use the terminology, but I'm really talking about these best management practices as they relate to scoping your fuel treatments on how to avoid impacts to wildlife and also how to benefit them. So having these BMPs are going to help you, sorry about that, they're going to help you create more multiple and long-term objectives. It's going to allow you to build better partnerships and better plan because you're looking at the landscape, you're looking at the health of the ecosystem, not just particularly around buildings and homes. So having those best management practices associated with that can really help you out. I really got involved with these BMPs, like I mentioned, through working on the Fire Safe Council Grants Clearinghouse group, that a number of groups would get funded and not be at all familiar with the environmental compliance process. And so better educating those folks on how long it takes, what might be involved, or how to avoid that was a more ideal situation. So that was one of the big things about developing that. But then also remembering this is not about a replacement for environmental compliance, that you still may trigger that based on where you get your funding, a lot of other things. So this isn't a replacement, but hopefully it would expedite your process and prepare you. So key steps in developing a CWPP. Before I go into that, I wanted to do just a quick poll on how many people are involved in community wildfire protection planning out there. Mike, I'm not sure how to get your polls to work here. Do I pull it over? And so I'm just curious how many people out there are involved in that, in developing these community wildfire protection plans. So it's kind of an even split, it looks like here. Interesting. So definitely ask questions if you're not completely clear on the process, but ideally think about it as a collaboration across the landscape and how it relates to fuel reduction and fire. So I'll go back into my presentation here. So key steps in developing a CWPP. Any collaboration, you're going to look at convening and engaging the right people. You're going to want to look at the scale and scope of the issue you're trying to address. And so you want to think about the core people that are involved that can influence that issue. So for fire management, who can influence those fire management activities, community attitudes, community development, building materials, who has influence on that? So for collaboration, you're looking at that way. The Community Wildfire Protection Plan actually requires 3 parties to approve the content of a CWPP. And that would be the state forester fire. In most cases, it's going to be a CAL FIRE unit that's involved in that, local fire, and local government. And that'll depend on the scale and scope of your plan. Federal agencies are not required to approve the content, but they should certainly be working with those partners across the landscape and those stakeholders, because you're wanting to figure out all of the issues and things going on in the area. And so having those other partners as core members, although they may not be signatory, is really key. But you do have 3 required signatory parties to that. And the other thing that's really helpful to think about would be the experts that you can have access to. So maybe they're not part of your core team, but maybe they have specialists, biologists, archaeologists, different experts that can assist you, that you'll be able to fold in and work with you. And so it's really, think about that group that will help you influence your issues and build your collaboration. So one of the key steps in the CWPP is establishing your base map. And before you really put a pen to paper and you go through any kind of GIS effort, you want to look at the general geographic area that you're going to be working in. Is it large enough that you can be truly strategic, that you can address where you can put strategic field treatments, where you can do fire prevention, different fire tactical efforts. So is it large enough to truly do that? But also, is it small enough that those key people involved in it are going to agree to the objectives and are truly vested in your efforts? And I can really speak to the being vested and looking at it. I work in 3 different states, and although I try to work with some of the local groups, I can't spend a whole lot of time. So for me, I wouldn't really be a good fit for that local community wildfire protection plan group, but I would be one of those technical experts. So just really scoping how much time, how much involvement, and looking at this little bullseye here, you can see that this was actually something modeled after Marine Heart's sustainable measures for kind of collaboration, looking at this overall environmental area, and then the community or the society, those people that live, play, and work in that area, and the resources that can assist that whole overall effort and that size and scope, rather than having various groups with minimal support to your efforts. So really keying in on the right size, not too big, not too small. And let me take a peek over here at some of the questions. See, Justin, you have Placer County for us. Trying to get plans. Help answer some questions and go through that, and I'll have a couple of pauses where I can go through.
Merriam, just note, there's several people. I asked if, in the chat box where people were working on CWPPs.
Oh, great.
Forest
Okay.
Hill in Placer County, Western Placer, San Diego County, Chino Hills. You know, and I've been having this little conversation in the chat box, so don't let it distract you. But there are a number of people that are listening in who are involved in doing them right now.
Nice. Great. Okay, so the CWPP doesn't actually say what kind of mapping you have to have. You don't have to necessarily do GIS or have aerial photos. Those are all very helpful to have. But in developing your base map, the keys that you really want to look at, you want to address which communities at risk that you have in the area, and that's actually a federal designation. There's a federal register list nationally of all the communities at risk, and the authority to update those lists were delegated down to the different state foresters, and in California that's actually administered by the California Fire Alliance. So there's a process on our website where different communities can actually apply to be added to that federal register list if they're not already on there. So including those in your mapping area is a priority, because that's where a lot of agencies and partnerships are focused, where their money and time need to be looking at working with those communities first and then building out with other areas. Now, another really important mapping consideration is to define your wildland-urban interface. And although there's a lot of guidance out there saying what that might be, is it a mile and a half out from different homes, that can be defined by your collaborative group. You get to define that. And like this Butte County CWPP you see here, they have the little red circle, which has the around the direct homes, the community homeowner defensible space sort of area, so it kind of helps define what kind of activities you will do there. And then it has the yellow boundary. Oops, looks like I lost things here. It is back up again.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. I don't think I was on. I don't have any control with my thing there.
I will advance it. You just tell me when.
Okay, go back one.
Okay.
So the yellow area, the adjacent wildland-urban interface, that's the one you'll see a lot of definitions out there talking about. Is it a mile and a half? And that's based on how far a fire ember can be carried into homes and potentially burn those homes down. And so you may be looking at projects and activities in that area based on dropping the fire out of the canopy and down to the ground, offering more tactical benefits for firefighters and reducing those embers. So talking about that adjacent WUI is important. A big part that people have left out in some of these CWPPs is defining it past that 1.5 miles. So looking at, in this plan, they're calling it the extended WUI, you're protecting these values at risk. So you're looking at power and water supply, and then other values such as recreation and wildlife. So define that WUI will really help bring in your partners and help prioritize funding. Okay, so forward one. Strategic objectives. That isn't listed on the CWPP key steps, but it is a key thing to think about before you go from defining your area and your base map and going into your risk assessment, is really looking at, for your collaborative group, what were your core values you're trying to protect? What are how you make those strategic and adaptive so you can be more flexible. And I can't see my graph on this slide here. I don't know if anybody else
Oh, yeah, I don't see it there either.
So I'll just define what that looks like. There is I had a graph there which talks about community wildfire protection plans at a landscape level. A lot of them that I've seen that have been really good have looked at something at a county or watershed level. And that can be developed after the fact, after there have possibly been some smaller CWPPs, or by building in the use of other agency risk assessments. But having something strategic at this landscape level, and then having more defined risk assessments at the sub-level, and those can be smaller CWPPs or just risk assessments, but allowing that CWPP to perform strategically, and I had listed down from smaller risk assessment components that there would be individual projects coming from those. So you may have the Forest Service or an agency that has a risk assessment and does projects, and you may have these other areas developing their individual projects, but you're not being necessarily strategic. And so having that higher level collaborative effort is really going to help place those across the landscape